All right, day 3, here we go. So I have this balanced equation. So today what we're going to do is mole to mass or mass to mole. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do this, and then I want you to try the ones on the back side of this page. Okay, so we have our balanced equation here. 2 moles of aluminum plus 3 moles of chlorine yield 2 moles of aluminum chloride. Okay, so what I've done here is I've just copied this a couple of times because we need this balanced equation for every question. All right, we don't really need it for that one. All right, so the first sentence, 2 moles of aluminum react with, 3 moles of chlorine to produce 2 moles of aluminum chloride. All right, so that's what our balanced equation is telling us. Now, we're going to use that along with what we learned about molar mass to figure out, we're going to do one more step in our calculation. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Let's take a look at the question. We're going to, and I'll show you how to set this up. So like I did before, I'm going to just highlight what we know. It says how many grams of aluminum chloride will be produced if 2.5 moles of aluminum react. All right, so 2.5 moles of aluminum is our starting number. What we're looking for is grams of AlCl3. All right, so on my balanced equation, now you can see why I put this here. In the balanced equation, what we're going to do is we're starting with 2.5 moles of aluminum. All right, so I'm just going to write that under the aluminum. And what we're going to end up with is grams of aluminum chloride. Okay, so this is going to be a 2-step mole calculation. So I'm going to set my train tracks, and I'm going to make a spot for 2 steps. All right, so now I know my starting number, 2.5 moles of aluminum, is going to go right here. Ooh, what was that? Okay. Sometimes these GoodNotes just goes crazy on me. Okay, 2.5. Wow, I am struggling. Okay, 2.5 moles of Al. So that's going to go here. Now, if we think about this, our starting number goes here. So whatever we start with has to go down here. Okay, now that's going to, if we start with moles, we go straight into our mole ratio. So in the mole ratio, we put what we're looking for on the top and what we started with on the bottom. So that's just like the problems you did yesterday. The last step is going to be the molar mass of our compound. Okay, so before we fill in everything, let's go ahead and do the molar mass of aluminum chloride. Okay, so we know that we have the molar mass of aluminum chloride is going to be 1 times the mass of aluminum. So get out your periodic tables because you're going to need them. And 3 times the mass of chlorine, 35.45. Okay, we're going to total that up for a grand total of 133.34 grams. So that's the mass of 1 mole of aluminum chloride. All right, so let's go back to our train tracks. So we start with moles of aluminum. We're going to use our mole ratio from the balanced equation. So 2 moles of aluminum goes on the bottom, and 2 moles of aluminum chloride go on the top. Now, our last step, we're going to convert to grams of what we're looking for because we want our answer to be in grams of aluminum chloride. So I'm going to put in the molar mass of aluminum chloride on the top over 1 mole, AlCl3. So if we set this up correctly, notice what happens. The moles of aluminum will cancel, and the moles of aluminum chloride will cancel, and we're left with grams. Hooray! Now we multiply by the numbers on the top and divide by the numbers on the bottom. So we have 2.5 times 2 times 133.34 divided by 2. So our grand total is 333.35 grams of AlCl3. So there's our answer. Okay. Next, we're going to The question says how many moles of Cl2 must react to produce 12.3 grams of aluminum chloride. Now this time, all right, so let's mark out what we've got here. So we're starting with 12.3 grams of aluminum chloride. So here's our starting compound, and we want to know moles of Cl2. Here's what we want to know, okay? So I'm going to write in here underneath the balanced equation what we know and what we're looking for. We know 12.3 grams of AlCl3, and we want to find out moles of Cl2. All right, so this is a two-step mole problem, just like before. So I'm going to set up my train tracks with 2 steps. So this time we're starting with grams, and we want to end with moles. So if we start with grams, we need the molar mass. All right. Conveniently, we already figured out the molar mass of aluminum chloride in the previous problem, so we don't have an extra step. Hooray. All right, so we're starting with grams of aluminum chloride. So our first step is going to be to convert from grams to moles of aluminum chloride, and then we use our mole ratio from the balanced equation. Okay, so let's fill in what we know and see what we end up with. Okay, so our starting number always goes at the beginning, so 12.3 grams of AlCl3. Now, we've got to get rid of these grams. That's where the mole ratio that's where the molar mass comes in. So for every 1 mole of AlCl3, we have 133.34 grams. Okay, now that we have moles of AlCl3, we can use the mole ratio. What we're looking for goes on the top, 3 moles of Cl2. And what we're getting rid of, or what we started with, goes on the bottom. 2 moles of Cl2. Okay, so in this case, if we start with grams, we need to do molar mass first and then the mole ratio. And remember, the 3 and the 2 come from the balanced equation. Those are the coefficients. And here we go. This is the best part. We're going to cross out the units that cancel. So grams of AlCl3 cancel. Oh gosh, I wrote the wrong thing on the bottom again. Get it together, Mrs. Geyer. Okay. Sorry, guys. That was struggle bus. AlCl3. I'm just trying to be too fancy with my colors. Okay, 3 moles of Cl2 for every 2 moles of AlCl3. I probably said the right thing and just wrote it wrong. All right, so here's our setup. And 12.3 times 1 times 3 divided by 133.34 times 2. All right, I like to do it in 2 steps on my calculator. I think you can figure that out. I'll just give you the final answer. 0.14 grams of Cl2. There we go. So it's really not that bad. We're just putting together the molar mass and the mole ratio into one problem. All right, let's do the next one. So here we go. Let's see if I can do this one without confusing everyone. Let's start with what we know, 3.4 moles of chlorine. What we're looking for, grams of aluminum. Okay, now I'm going to write that underneath the balanced equation. So 3.4 moles of chlorine, that's where we're starting. So I'm just going to write 3.4 moles underneath the Cl2. And we want to know grams of aluminum. Okay. The setup's going to be all the same. If we start with moles, we do mole ratio first, then the molar mass. So we need to figure out the molar mass of the aluminum, because that's where we're going to end up. This is where we're starting, moles of Cl2. Okay, train tracks. We got 2 steps, 1, 2. We'll put the number that we start with at the beginning, 3.4 moles of Cl2. All right, so that goes right here. Now we're going to go straight to the mole ratio, so that's going to go there, and then what we're looking for goes on the top. And then the last step is going to be all about the aluminum. Okay, So mole ratio comes first because we started with moles. Coefficients. We got to use the coefficients. So 2 moles of aluminum for every 3 moles of Cl2. All right, the last step is the molar mass. Well, the molar mass of aluminum, you just look that up on the periodic table. There's no adding because it's an element, 26.98 grams of aluminum for every 1 mole of aluminum. And yay, satisfying part, crossed it out. Yep, moles of chlorine cancel, moles of aluminum cancel, and we're left with grams. Multiply all across the top, divide by what's on the bottom, and you get 61.2 grams of aluminum. All right. One more to go. Okay, last one. What do we know here? 17 grams of aluminum react. How many moles of aluminum chloride will be produced? All right, so let's see what we got here. I'm going to write it in the balanced equation. So we're starting with 17 grams of aluminum. And we want to know moles of aluminum chloride. Okay, so let's set up our train tracks. It's a 2-step mole ratio problem. I'm going to do it over here because I've got more room. I don't know, that little banner thing is in my way. All right, 17 grams of aluminum. All right, so there's my starting number. So if I start with grams, you know what comes first, right? Molar mass comes first. And then my starting number is going to be on the bottom of my roll ratio, and what I'm looking for is going to go on the top. So, molar mass of aluminum, so easy. Just look it up on the periodic table. So for every 1 mole of aluminum, it has a mass of 26.98 grams. Now the next step is my mole ratio. So I know that I want to end up with aluminum chloride, so that's going to go on top, 2 moles of AlCl3. And I know that I started with aluminum, so that's going to go on the bottom, 2 moles of Al. All right, 17 times 1 times 2 divided by 26.98 times 2. So do the math in your calculator. Boom, 0.63 grams. AlCl3. Ta-da! All right, you got it. Use these examples as a model and try number 2 on the back. Okay, and I know you can do it.